Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the US Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our virtual Enlightenment Salon today. I am streaming this from the Longevity Summit Dublin. By the time you watch this, the summit will have concluded. However, I wanted to bring this conversation to you as an example of some of the many fascinating individuals that I have met at the summit, including a cyborg, Sophie Jones. She has been a transhumanist for quite some time, and you delivered a speech on transhumanism 7 years ago. Tell us about it.
Okay, so I've been very much into transhumanism ever since I can remember, and I was asked to give a speech because I actually talked about transhumanism to someone, and they were launching a conference with a few hundred people going, and they needed a speaker. So they asked me to talk about the future of the human race and where I saw that future going, and I incorporated transhumanism into it, Audrey D. Gray into it, Elon Musk into it. And half the people in the audience, it blew their mind because they had never even heard of transhumanism, so it was effective in getting the message out.
Yes, and you're quite the storyteller. I will link our audience to your speech. Now, tell us a bit about what first introduced you to transhumanism. How did you first find out about the philosophy? When did it happen?
It's kind of gradual, really. So I always played the PlayStation. I'm a very little girl. My hands are naturally like that because I used to Final Fantasy and Tomb Raider too much. And when did it come about? Do you know what? There's no specific pinpoint. I've always been into computers. So at the moment, actually, this is an example of it. I have a chip on my finger, and it actually lights up. You see that?
See, I said she was a cyborg.
And I have this one, which is the NFC tag, so it lights up my LinkedIn.
Yes. So when did you acquire the NFC tag?
A couple months back. So basically, for the fun of it, I build PCB boards, work with circuits. I actually created a neural network using electronic components the other week. Let me quickly show you. So the thing is, when you're doing things like this and you're researching things, you come across like some of this technology is out there, but it just actually doesn't get used. So, I'll tell you what it was. My friend got an NC tag input into his hand, and I was interviewing him about it, and he said his mum freaked out, and I said, well, why would you cut your hand open to begin with? Because this technology is quite new. Why don't you just get it on your finger like I've got? And then he was like, I never thought of that. So that's how that conversation came about. So that's a neural network.
Yes. Quite fascinating, and we will delve into that.
And that's a systematic.
Yes, actually, I will ask you to elaborate on those in a little bit. You're fine. I wanted to ask you a few more questions about your fingernails and the chips embedded into them. So how invasive or non-invasive was the procedure to get them embedded into your fingernails? Can you attach them or detach them?
Yeah, basically I've just got clear nail varnish over it, because this is the thing, right? Innovation itself. I've got an MBA in innovation, is in a computer science degree. Innovation is just taking someone's idea and making it better or enhancing it. So I personally believe we should all think of ways to enhance things that are currently out there. And then society will become better, right? Like, I don't understand why somebody hasn't taken the technology of color changing light bulbs and implemented some sort of AI with open recognition software, OpenCV, so that and programmed it so that when, say, your mum, say you're deaf, right? Say you're deaf, and your mum comes to the door, your room lights up green to say somebody's entering your premises, but don't worry, it's safe. If it's a stranger, then it goes red. You can have different color codes. So I think as a society, we should be more technologically advanced, because then we can start implementing stuff like that ourselves rather than wait for someone to have to paint on it, invent it, launch it. You know what I mean? If we became more of a technically advanced society would evolve so much, because we'll all be doing our little things. And I think we're seeing that now. We're starting to see more people becoming entrepreneurs.
Yes, absolutely. And those are some quite creative ideas. I like the fact that you took a procedure that's normally quite invasive. As you pointed out, most people implant the NFC tags right here in this region between the thumb and index finger, and it's a painful procedure. Our first presidential candidate, Zoltan Istvan, when he was touring on his presidential campaign, went to a biohacker facility in California, and he got that kind of chip implanted into this region. And what it could do is essentially what your chips are able to do. It could open his phone or unlock certain doors, but he had to undergo this painful procedure. And the question is, why? Right. Why, if you can insert it using a kind of an attachment onto your fingernail?
And also, this technology is very new, right? Mm-hmm. So from a consumer point of view, you need to get people developing the confidence in it, getting them used to it. I think it's very important for us to think as well as a society that this technology is fine with us because we're used to it. But what if you've got someone and they're very religious? All of a sudden they think you're the Antichrist. We have a responsibility to not only take it all in ourselves, but to educate those that actually don't know about it so they don't freak out. And I just think, obviously, there will be people that freak out. Doctors, what do you go to a doctor? Oh, I got this implanted into myself. You know what I mean? It's just building up that confidence. Like, oh, it's on the nail. Oh, okay, so you can take it off. And then they're more likely to try it, right? They're more likely to try this because they know it can come off at any time. Whereas if you get it implanted, it's a big step.
Right. And that's a quite astute observation. Note that nobody protests people having pacemakers, even though...
Yeah, my dad has a pacemaker.
Right. And that is a much more significant intervention than having a chip implant. Yet a lot of people, for whatever reason, think that a chip implant is the mark of the beast, but a pacemaker is absolutely fine because they can't see it.
Yeah.
And the person who has a pacemaker on his or her exterior looks just like an ordinary everyday human. And even though you are quite the cyborg, when one looks at you, one doesn't notice anything that is off. So I think you're correct. This is the way to achieve acceptance for these technologies, including very ambitious kinds of modifications and enhancements.
Yeah.
If they can be compatible with the human form as traditionally envisioned.
And a sensibility, right? Because some people are like, oh, I'm going to put an NFC chip in my ear. Well, how are you going to pay for something? You know what I mean? You're like,
Yes, that makes complete sense. So it has to
be... Imagine a shopkeeper being freaked out by that.
Right. It has to be quite practical and capable of being deployed in everyday use. So I'm curious about this because around the time you made that presentation about transhumanism, there was this trial of Google Glass, and the trial was for the beta version of Google Glass, where Google allowed only a select group of people who kind of signed up for the trial in advance to purchase a version, and everyday consumers could not access Google Glass. So essentially, some people were
What is
able.
Google Glass?
Google Glass is a kind of augmented reality set of glasses
Okay.
that Google debuted in the early to mid 2010s.
Okay.
So you could have like a display in front of your eyes, and it was essentially analogous to having your mobile phone directly
Yeah, I know
accessible
what
to
you
you,
mean, yeah.
but it had recording capabilities as well.
Yeah.
So some people were uneasy about these Google Glass wearers coming into public places and being able to like record video or record conversation surreptitiously. But do you think it may be that the Google Glasses were, one, very conspicuous, and two, had this sense of exclusivity about them that led to a kind of public backlash against them?
So I gave a speech like 7 years ago. So what year was that in?
So I believe that
2015?
the Google Glass trials happened around 2013 or 14.
Okay, so we take it back to 2012. That's when I was kind of getting back from Australia. At that point in time, technology really wasn't, we have mobile phones and everything, but YouTube was just kicking off. You know what I mean? It's like the knowledge we have nowadays really wasn't as much in the popular domain around technology. Hardly nobody could code. There wasn't this like knowledge base. When I gave my speech, actually, a lot of people in the audience, probably 95%, never understood most of it. I got a lot of feedback. They were like, "Can you explain this to me? How do you know any of that?" And the one that did, he randomly, very intelligent guy. He went on to study a artificial intelligence course at UCL. So back to your point, what was the question?
Yes. So what do you think it was about Google Glass during that era
Just the
that?
fact that it was so new. And you see this with innovation, right? When something gets launched and it's brand new, people haven't seen it before, what are they going to do? They're going to freak out. Because at the end of the day, knowledge is power. And if you don't have any knowledge, you're not confident. You're not confident in something, you freak out, you don't understand it. That's why people get bullied, right? Because they don't understand them, because they're different. You get a kid and the kid's always getting picked on, and it goes up to the headmistress, and the headmistress of the school says, "Why is it always you?" It's like, well, it's not always that kid, is it? It's because that kid's different. People don't like different. But what you always find is over time, actually, that difference becomes the norm, and then everyone accepts it. And then everyone's like, why did this not get picked up later? You need that trend, right? You need that trend to spark it off, and then it just goes. So it was just, yeah.
Yes, indeed. So I'm reminded of a little handout that I was given as a school child back in the 1990s, and a lot of kids of my generation will remember this, like words of advice from Bill Gates to young students. And the last piece of advice from Bill Gates was, "Be nice to nerds, you might end up working for one." And I think he was giving some encouragement to kids who felt bullied or out of place or misunderstood, because they're often the ones who go on to achieve great things, and because they think outside the box, they're able to rise to positions of greater prominence and influence than their peers.
And tougher skin equals thicker wallet. So at the end of the day, the measure of man is in how he rises, not in how he falls, right? The measure of man.
Indeed, indeed.
We all suffer in some shape or form, but at the end of the day, if you take that, you harness that. Money cannot buy strength and quality of soul and toughness. You can't go on a course to learn to be tough. You've got to experience very harsh realities to become tough.
So the toughness would precede the achievement then.
So, and also if you think about it, right, like 20 years ago, we were hunter-gatherers. And then we started to, 8,000 years later, we started to see this change from hunter-gatherers into farmers. So people started to farm more. The earth started to heat up. We started to accumulate land. And with that land, we then started to harness crops and grow crops. And there was this transition of no longer having to be fast and catch a rabbit. And, you're running down a forest and you think, all of a sudden you see a a deer, you've got to make that split decision. Do you go after the deer or carry on with the rabbit? And then another split decision. Oh my God, it's a predator. What do you do? So we started to slow up because we were planting crops and like we started to shift. And obviously money and accumulation of assets. So we started to change even like the hands, like everything, because you're suddenly doing that. You're not. So you start to see this trend in society. You start to see this just how we're made up. And I think you're starting to see that now, right? Like we're moving away from who can beat up so-and-so will be the most, like everyone's scared of them, to now all of a sudden, oh, cybercrime. Oh my God, he's going to hack my phone. Do you know what I mean? It better be nice to hit him. So it's, that's why you can't predict it. You can't predict where life's going to go. Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Like, people I know from 20 years back never could have guessed anything about where they would all end up when they wanted to. That would end up in jail.
Yes, well, there's a whole lot of path dependency in life as well. But you make an interesting observation because evolutionarily, the traits that were favored in our primitive hunter-gatherer past were like brutish strength, because if you were a big, bulky Paleolithic hunter-gatherer who could club the other Paleolithic hunter-gatherers over the head, then you achieved dominance within your tribe. If you were kind of a scrawny intellectual type, you would likely be bullied or even clubbed to death by the big, brawny, less intelligent types in that type of setting. And yet, as human civilization advanced, those are no longer the traits that are selected for through our technological or societal evolution, yet our biological evolution has not kept up with this.
And I think we're going to revert back to that because of transhumanism. So if you're getting injections, right, and those injections say you inject yourself and it lasts for 5 years, and that injection allows you to build the best muscle strength of your body, it allows you to have zero fat, it allows your brain to be at its peak performance. As a human being, technically, then you become this hunter-gatherer. All of a sudden, you are top of your game. You're like a top athlete, and you've had to do nothing to achieve it, right? So technically, one could argue that we're going back to being at peak fitness whilst also having the intelligence. Because if all of a sudden we can also enhance ourselves with nanotechnology inside of the brain and learn a language in seconds, we have the best of both worlds, right? But then what you start to see is because it's in our nature to look up to the stars and wonder what is out there. So you start to see this interstellar traveling species. So all of a sudden society as we know it won't even exist. There will be dedicated people that give birth to to human beings. We won't reproduce and won't even be the main aim of us because we'll be so focused on hobbies and intellectual stuff that we won't even have time to think about kids. And the people that do have kids will be purely focused on that. They have high maternal instincts and will raise them in the best way possible. Hence why I don't have kids, because I'm so focused on my projects and my things. You know what I mean? It's just, it would be a total shift and we can't even comprehend it. Especially religious people, right? With religious people, it's all about reproduction and, so all of a sudden this transhumanism stuff and building things and coding and traveling into space. How do they cope with that if they think God created the world and we can't leave Earth?
I would say this is already the case for many transhumanists, where they see some sort of individual sense of purpose that they choose, and they actualize through their own projects, their own endeavors, and they don't really accept like societally imposed purposes. So, for instance, Aubrey de Grey has said before he doesn't have kids, and there are a lot of people who would be good parents, who would be competent at raising kids, and whether or not he would be competent at raising kids is beside the point, because he has a unique skill set, he has a unique set of ideas that he can promote to world-changing impact.
Yeah, and I think that's the way we should evolve as a species. It should be more, what do you give back to society? So do you give back kids because you're very good at nurturing them and encouraging them in a very good environment and they turn out healthy and really loved? Or is your thing that you're some super genius with electronics and you build this super genius chip? You know what I mean? It should be like, what do you as a person give back to society, no matter how huge, small, medium, what do you give back, basically? I see society, we all have PhDs.
Yes.
It's research, right?
And hopefully those PhDs or the equivalents thereof would be much quicker to acquire, especially if we could upload knowledge directly into our minds, or at the very least master certain learning techniques that could bypass a lot of the institutional rigidity of education these days. But I think with transhumanism, of course, there would be a proliferation of diversity in terms of individual pursuits and lifestyles and ways in which people find meaning. And it's correct, not everybody needs to follow the same script. And indeed, this is already part of a trajectory of societal change. It's well known. As societies become more advanced, as they become more industrialized, as there's more of a knowledge economy, the birth rate tends to decline. And there are more opportunity costs of having children.
And also creativity and technology. The more people live longer, the more you start to accumulate knowledge in different areas. And with that, you start to naturally get a little bit more innovative, right? You start to put things together. With that comes this entrepreneurial spirit. So I definitely as well start to see people becoming more entrepreneurs, people creating more businesses. You'll start to see more like, oh, I got a business. Oh, so have I. But with ownership of a business comes responsibility. So you start to see in society a trend towards being more responsible, respecting things more, because all of a sudden they've got to. If you want to be a director, you can't be acting in a certain way because you can't keep. And if you're not a director, you don't have that responsibility to be a director. You can't launch a company. So if you come up with a super good idea that's worth like millions, you can't launch a company. So all of a sudden you start to see people follow law and order a bit more because they want to have that entrepreneurial spirit. They want to make money because after all, everybody wants to make money, right? If you make money, you get to relax, you get to do this, you get to do that. Money is what drives everything. So if we're entering into a more entrepreneurial society, it naturally would lead to more law and order so that they can continue doing that.
Yes.
Obviously, it's society criminals, but do you know what I mean? On a majority of things.
Yes, and that is, of course, one of the great hopes of transhumanism, that it will lead to a more peaceful, more orderly society where people feel safe to actualize whatever vision of themselves and to contribute toward whatever vision of the world they consider to be best, as long as it's peaceful. And
and speaking of actualize, we have Maslow's law of hierarchy needs, self-actualization.
Yes.
So if you're living in a society where actually you become an entrepreneur, you launch something, and all of a sudden you see it with like crypto, right? They become like billionaires, like super young. So you launch this business, and all of a sudden you're retired at the age of like 30 or 40. So what do? You can go into research projects, you can learn things, and then because you're so happy, you've met all your Maslow hierarchy of needs, you've got security, you've got this, you've got that, food, shower, everything, it's all met. So then you start hitting that self-actualization, or as they say in alchemy, the philosopher's stone. So all of a sudden it's like this, like, and the more people that have that feeling in society, the better they're going to help others. So you get this instant collaboration. And like game theory, right? Everybody always wins if they collaborate. Collaboration is tick to tap.
Yes, and if only more people realize that, because of course we still have so much of our evolved ancestral baggage, given that technology has advanced so much, human biology not nearly to the same extent. So a lot of people still think of the world in zero-sum terms. They think that in order for me to win, the other person has to lose, and I have to be like the Paleolithic hunter-gatherer and club the other person over the head. And how do we transcend that? That has been a challenge because we don't yet have the technology to quite re-engineer the human brain. So we have to think of transitional measures that would achieve similar effects, but of course, without the risk of messing up something that may be beyond our current capabilities to accurately engineer.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of it stems from boredom, right? Because if you've got this interest in technology and you're making PCB boards and you're creating all these inventions and you're creating things that you're super excited about, all of a sudden, you, as they say, the devil makes idle, what is it? Idle work for, no, the devil makes work for idle hands.
Yes.
So if you're bored, you've got nothing to do. Say you live in the middle of nowhere, you've got nothing to do. All you can do is have a drink with your friends. And that leads to bad behavior. Like, you go, you do bad things. You're unproductive. But if you've got all these interests, all these things you enjoy, all of a sudden you understand things, you're excited to wake up in the morning and start coding, start doing this, you're just going to be so much more productive for society, and society as itself would become a more productive environment.
Indeed. So.
Oh, and then you won't get depressed. How can you get depressed if you've got all these projects to work on? How can you get depressed if the first thing you wake up in the morning that you want to do is to work on your research project or create something or finish it off? That's why you see like inventors like Nikola Tesla, where they were just so excited, like they were hardly asleep because they just want to continue with their invention. If you get that drive in people, can you imagine how less people will be depressed? But sometimes when you're working on something and you don't have that confidence or you don't have that knowledge, you can sometimes then get depressed because you give up on it. But if you have the ability of the artificial intelligence with the nanotechnology inside the brain, so you can just read something, learn it all, then computerize that, all of a sudden you're not going to get depressed because you're not going to reach these barriers. And if you do reach a barrier, and likewise, if people are more collaborative, you can reach out to people. It's just like a spinning circle, isn't it?
Yes, a virtuous cycle. If a person can find this kind of meaning in a set of projects, a set of self-initiated, self-driven undertakings. And I think our society currently suffers from a crisis of meaning because postmodernism has deconstructed prior sources of meaning without really replacing them with anything substantive. And my contention has been that transhumanism offers this new reinvigorated sense of meaning, exactly in the ways that you identified, that people will pursue these projects of technological innovation and transformation in ways that are palpable for themselves and the people around them, that transform the world in a manner that brings returns here and now. They don't have to wait until some imagined afterlife. They don't have to content themselves that, they may be doing the right thing even though they're suffering. They're not going to suffer if they transform their physical environment in ways that benefit them. So it's a very inspiring vision, and for those of us who are driven to achieve it, it already provides that sense of meaning. But how do we bring the rest of the population on board? Because we still have a crisis in our society of depression, suicide, people taking out their frustrations, wanting to burn down the system, whether they're right-wing or left-wing, they're hyper-polarized, and they have this zero-sum mentality. So they don't understand what you just articulated. How do we enable them to see this?
You get them interested in things that they understand and they would like. For example, my nail, the way it lights up.
Yes.
Every girl can wear that, right? Even men, everyone can wear that.
Yes.
So I've just pulled this off of my eye. I don't know if you noticed me going like that. So this, I'll explain it before I show it. You're laughing because you know what it is. So basically, every single interest in life, whether or not it interests you, has some benefit for you, whether or not you know it. So me, I would put on mascara daily. Like, putting that mascara on, wash it off, and that's what ladies, well, people that wear makeup do. Gotta be careful. People that wear makeup. So somebody out there has come up with this invention. Rather than wear mascara, they've invented this, false eyelashes. Now, There are false eyelashes out there already, right? They've been out there for years. But this has a special glue on it, and it actually lasts 4 days. And this is a special lash in that it will last like a year or two. So what has happened is someone in the beauty industry that obviously is into beauty has seen a market there and entered it. So I don't have any interest in beauty at all. Like I can't stand, like it's not my thing. I'll put lashes on and try to make myself look better, but I'm not into like beauty. I'm not into sports. I'm not into it, right? But as a product, I'll buy that because it's good. I can just save time in the morning, put it on, done. So the point I'm trying to make is we go after things for the general population that take off fast. You go after trends like my nail. If people start to see that, I've just had like 13-year-old girls, no interest in technology. Like, where did you buy that? I want to buy it. And now they're all buying it. There's a trend setting off there. So you do the same with transhumanism. You look at what would make the average person want to take it up, and once they bit it, you've got them. So, I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It does make sense. And it's really
now
quite...
I've got an eyelash.
But it served a purpose.
Yeah.
Because you were able to characterize these kinds of durable false eyelashes as a transhumanist technology. And yes, you're correct. They are body augmentations in again, a manner that coheres with a more traditional aesthetic that a lot of people can identify with and try to emulate. So if a young woman sees that and associates that with transhumanism, she might be more likely to take an interest in transhumanism. And that does lead me into another area of curiosity, and I think you might be able to provide some insights into this. So I periodically look at the membership statistics for the US Transhumanist Party, and this is not just a phenomenon within the Transhumanist Party, but other organizations within our movement have this demographic ratio as well of approximately 85% males to 15% females. And I have various hypotheses as to why it might be, but I'm not entirely certain, because over the years that ratio, it has maybe improved a little bit. When I told Aubrey de Grey that we have 15% female membership a few years ago, he said, well, with 15% female membership, you're actually doing quite well by historical standards. So what is it that you think brings about this disparity? How can we address it?
So. I was raised, my mum never ever asked me to come into the kitchen to help her cook. She never, didn't do any of that. My dad taught me tiling, all the practical things, how to lay bricks. He would take me fishing. I would dig for worms. Like, I was raised technically as if I was a guy, but I wasn't, because I'd be wearing dresses. So I'm very andronymous. Is that the right word? Andronymous? It's like masculine, feminine. So I dress like a female, but I'm quite like, well, I don't like sports, but I just never liked that anyway. My dad never liked that. But do you see what I mean? There was no like, oh, you gotta help me cook, Sophie. Like, none of that. I was just raised normal. Like, nothing put upon me.
So no preordained gender roles?
No, and I love Barbies. They were my favorite thing. But I also like Tomb Raider, right? Like, I've got Tomb Raider comics. I've got some signed. But like, my comics, they're beautiful. Like, it's like beautiful woman look. So I just think, I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know why more women aren't into transhumanism. I think it's fantastic.
Yes. Well, I have noticed that the female transhumanists whom I encounter tend to be exceptionally competent, driven, accomplished, yourself included, of course. And those women understand it.
Yeah.
Those women understand the importance of individual agency. They have their own projects. They have a very high value that they place on autonomy. And generally speaking, they tend to rise into leadership positions very quickly. So there are many prominent female transhumanists in our community. I can think of, for instance, Liz Parrish or Marian Trigus Abramson or Natasha Vita Moore, and there are many others who take these leadership roles. They're very articulate individuals. What we have less of are more, let's say, everyday transhumanists, people who would identify as being transhumanists the same way that some others might identify as being Republicans or Democrats or sports fans of a particular team.
Maybe they don't know about it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I suspect there is an awareness gap, and one of the hypotheses that I've had is that initially, go ahead.
There are techniques out there for women of removing hair, right? I don't know them because I'm not in that field. But if I was in that field, I know them all.
Right, right. So it may just be that the fields with which transhumanism has historically had an affinity, for whatever reason, were more male dominant, like tech professions, for instance. People who are in tech fields, they tend to understand transhumanism more because they work on the technologies directly.
And then you get friends where you discuss this, right? Whereas with women, what you see is they'll have kids and then they don't really see their friends as much. Whereas with guys, they always carry on seeing their friends. They still carry on with that conversation. They still get out there more. I've encountered it in work where I've not been invited out because I'm not a guy. Do you know what I mean? So you're not having that same level of conversation. You're not becoming those of which you're around.
Right, right. And yet, if you have certain personality traits, like if you are very driven, then you will nonetheless find ways. Yes, information. Indeed. So
what you see is you see a lot of women that tend to find that information themselves. So what you need to look at is how do you put that information out there amongst women that don't tend to look for this information? So how do you put it out there in a very innovative way? Do you go into beauty shops and just leave it on the side, like notes, and then they're sat there having their hair done? Or you put it inside the magazines they read. So they're reading the, I don't know, Vogue magazine at the hairdressers, and all of a sudden they see this A4 bit of paper that you put in and it says about transhumanism, and they're like, oh, nobody's around, I might have a read of this. You know what I mean?
Right. It's
thinking about things in a creative, different outside of the box way. Hence why I got an MBA in innovation. No, I'm joking.
But what you did with the example of the false eyelashes is indeed a case of creating that kind of relatability, something that I wouldn't even think of. I mean, to be honest, until you told me that your eyelashes were false, I wouldn't have known. I just think she has long eyelashes.
Well, my hair's real. My hair's real. I said to Audrey, I said, my hair's longer than his beard.
That's an achievement.
That is an achievement.
So it's interesting.
What do you think he thinks about the fact my hair is longer than his beard?
I think he will just grow out his beard to be longer. He'll perceive it as competition.
This is a competition, Audrey. Can you grow your beard as long as my hair?
Well, you know, Aubrey is well and truly back. He has his new foundation now. And
he's on it.
I am one of the directors of the new foundation. I still don't know the name of the foundation, but I am a director of it. So I'm sure he's quite thrilled with that. And
I think at the next board meeting you should say, Aubrey, I've got a very important thing I want to bring to the board meeting.
So your MBA in innovation.
Oh my God, my eyelash is falling off now.
So, with regard to your MBA in innovation
And entrepreneurship.
and entrepreneurship, what motivated you to pursue it? And can you describe the process a bit for those who are interested in that?
Oh my God, I cried for the first month. So, as I mentioned before, computer science. So I was a bit naughty at school. They didn't want me to do A levels, so I ended up doing equivalent to A levels. Long story cut short, put like 120% into that course, got equivalent 3 A levels at A level, got into uni, blah blah blah. So computer science degree. And whenever I saw people C levels, they always had an MBA.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought it sounded really like cool. And I was working at a company, and I just wanted to take a strategic management leadership certificate. And my boss was like, no. And I had been there 3 years, and I was just fed up. And then I've done entrepreneurial things, but unfortunately it's never really paid off. So I wrote books, I've like under different names, I've launched websites. I mean, in 2003, when I was 15, I put all of my money into learning about HTML. And I went around to 200 companies, and I said to them in my local town, city, I said, do you want me to build a website for you? £200, I'll build your website, get you top in the search engine. Nobody wanted it. They were like, that isn't going to kick off. That will never go anywhere. We don't want to waste our money on that. So I was like, okay, fine. So nobody, apart from friends and family that I did for free, nobody took me up on my web service. So I was always coming up with these new ideas, but it was always like ahead of time or just never paid off. So you can be entrepreneurial but not successful. You know what I mean? I was always sent on entrepreneurial courses. When I was 16, I was pulled out of college for a week so the tutors wanted me on this entrepreneur. So anyway, so I've always enjoyed the topic. I've always enjoyed business. So I saw this scholarship for this MBA program, and I was like, oh, I'm just going to, like, I wanted to study. I was at that point in my life where you feel like you've hit that plateau. You want to do more with your life, but you're not getting those opportunities. You feel a bit disheartened because, like I was saying, you've got no reason, you've got nothing to work on to get like your brain into. So I applied for this scholarship. Long story cut short, got it. Did not expect to. So then I started this MBA, and I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. I hadn't studied for 10 years. So I like cried. But what I did is I looked at, because I'm not an academic person. It's painful for me to do it. So I bought a book on how you write essays, how you think about strategically from that point of view of, okay, so this is perspective 1, this is perspective 2. Based on that, it's very factual, how you reach a conclusion, why you justify it, what the difference is, blah, blah, blah. So I started thinking in that way. My thinking started to change. Long story cut short, I got distinction. I got the highest mark ever. And I actually did my MBA in 18 months whilst working full-time for 12 months.
Well, congratulations. That's quite an achievement. So what skill sets?
And I also got that strategic leadership course that my boss never wanted to pay for through this course. Yeah, nice. Karma comes back around. You just got to push it on.
So what skills do you think that program gave you that you're now able to deploy?
Loads. So what it gave me mostly was the ability to think strategically and to develop critical thinking, because with an MBA, you've got to complete 12 modules. And when you pass, if you fail a module, you can't carry on.
You're out of the program?
Yeah, you get one retake and you're out. So luckily, I didn't fail any. I don't know why I'm touch wooding because I've already passed. Like, it's not as if I'm still on the course.
Well, sometimes those kinds of intense study regimens give one flashbacks.
Yeah.
I took actuarial exams for 10
God.
years to become a fellow of
That
the
is
Society of
intense.
Actuaries, ultimately.
Well done.
Yes, thank you. Those are some of the most difficult exams in the world. I
know.
appreciate that.
I like. Could not do that.
Yes, and at least with the actuarial exams, you could theoretically take them as many times as you needed to pass, but each sitting had at best like a 40-45% pass rate. So even somebody who had passed 7, 8, 9 exams prior to that time had maybe a 60% probability of failing that next exam if he or she were a typical actuarial candidate. And if you weren't a typical actuarial candidate, you would be putting in like 600 hours ahead of each exam and trying to memorize each conceivable type of problem and the sequence of steps to solve it.
And that's what I had to do with the MBA.
Mhm.
So what I did is, when I was taking notes, I'd create a mind map. And when it got to the exam, like 2 months before the exam, I'd have this mind map and I'd just close my eyes and I'd try to draw it out in my mind, like all the different connections. And it got to a point where I had like 5 mind maps on A4 bit of paper with all content across the whole of the module. And I was able to memorize every single section. But with transhumanism, you wouldn't have to go through that pain. All of a sudden, you could just have it flashed in front of you, and you just go in, oh yeah, it's that. Now, does that make us lazy? Or technically, does it not make us lazy? Because with transhumanist technology inside our brain, neurons would be still developed.
Right.
You get what I mean? So
Yes.
if we're using artificial intelligence to create these neurons that retrieve information like that, so we no longer have to create it ourselves, does it make us lazy? Or, you know what I mean? If we get injections where all of a sudden it gives us muscle mass, where we don't have to put 2 hours a day in at the gym, like, is it technically the same thing as going there and achieving it? Like, obviously you don't get that, like, oh, and then the next day, oh yes, I'm so sore, I can't get out of this chair. Yeah. Do you know
Familiar feeling for me after running an ultra marathon. Though I've always been able to walk afterward, but sometimes it's a bit more of a hobble after like a really long distance race, marathon or longer. I need to take it easy for at least the next day.
Yeah, no, I've worked out at the gym before and I've been sore for 4 days. I can't even get out of bed. I've ripped my stomach. But anyway. But you get what I mean. It kind of takes away that strength of character if all of a sudden you're relying on nanotechnology in your brain to achieve something. It takes that strength of character away. But at the same time, does that mean then it creates a more peaceful society because you're not as aggressive?
Perhaps. Or perhaps your energy, whether that be physical energy or mental energy, is redirected toward other tasks or a different level of functioning. So as we alluded to in the course of our discussion of our respective studies, in terms of passing a lot of exams today, much of the work is in the form of memorization. And there are higher level cognitive functions besides memorization, which are more conceptual, analytical in nature. And if you have to memorize large laundry lists of facts, then you don't have as much mental bandwidth for the higher order functions. If you're allowed, for instance, to take an open book test or use online sources to look up information, while some people might scoff at that and say, oh, that makes it so much easier, that depends on the nature of the problems you're asked to address. Because, say, at any sort of job that involves knowledge work, most often people are not going to care that you're looking up facts. They're going to care if you're solving that specific problem that is in front of you.
Getting the job done and making a profit.
Yes, so having an open book exam, I'm going to be a bit controversial here, may actually be more realistic in terms of reflecting how most jobs are done. And yet, what that allows the exam designers to do is actually put forward a more complex task that could still be quite challenging, even though you have all of the world's information at your disposal, because you can't just look up the answer on Wikipedia. You have to still use your mind to custom design an answer. And people do that already today. They do that every single day.
And this is another thing that gets me, right? You can tell it irritates me because I'm crossing my legs here. When people say, oh, like, don't go to school, don't study, so-and-so didn't study. It's like, that dude got accepted into Harvard. Like, he must have had some good study skills, or must have had some quite high intellectual skill academically to get accepted into Harvard. Like, yeah, he went there and dropped out, but he still got accepted. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think people don't think about that. Like,
right. Yes. And by the way, my advice to everybody is stay in school, or if you've pursued a study program, a designation program, whatever it is, stick through it until the end, even if it's not something that is riveting or thrilling for you.
Yeah, and it never is.
Right, just get it done.
Yeah.
And then move on to whatever else you want to do.
Like, I don't know about you, but I pick up a book and a new topic, and I'll read it, and I get to the bottom of the page, and I don't remember any of it, and I've got to read it. I'll read it like 3-4 times. When you start a new topic, like coding, right, you do it, or you read about it, you start learning about it, and you want to cry. But then you start, over a certain period of time, really picking it up, and then you'll probably think this was what you do. It's like you read so much about it, and all the basic stuff you then really understand, and you get to like the expert level, and you're like, is this all there is on it? And then you
Yes, true mastery sometimes doesn't even feel like mastery. It just feels kind of like second nature, like you're doing something that makes sense and is directly accessible to your mind, and then other people are wondering, well, how is he or she able to do that? Because they don't have that same framework that has been built up over the course of years of exposure to the subject matter and rigorous study.
Yeah, so what I want to say is everybody goes through pain when they pick up a new topic. The trick is to just plow through it like a tank, right? Going through a mountain.
Yes, indeed. Perseverance.
Perseverance.
So that is how you accomplished your MBA, and that has opened some doors for you. So your work involves essentially identifying potential businesses for your company to invest in. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Okay, yeah. So basically, the way the world goes around, I'm looking for companies, new ventures in very breakthrough, innovative technology or solutions to invest in. So when you're an entrepreneur and you start up a company, you go through a period of cycles, right? Sometimes you need money, so you bootstrap it, so you go to people you know to get that money, or you might need more money. So for example, if you've got an app and you've got this app idea, that's great. But first thing you got to do is look at your intellectual property, right? Or you create an invention. Is it patented? What's your trademark? It's kind of, you could always change your name, right? But is it trademarked, patent, trademark, design rights? How will it be laid out? Make sure no one else copies that. Just things like that, really. Looking at making sure someone else doesn't already have it, so you don't get sued launching it. But then you've got the aspect of building it, right? So if you want, let's take something simple like an app. You want to build the app, you've got to think about how that structure is going to be laid out. How is the user going to interact with that app? Then from that, you've got to think about the database behind it. Like what's going to go into those tables? What's going to go into those columns? How will you store that information? And then you've got to think about the API. How will that information that the user gets on the iPhone be transferred to your API. What's it going to be in? Is it going to be in this? Is it going to be in that? Is it going to be in Python? And then from that, how are you then going to program that to go into your database? And likewise, to bring it back, how do you bring it all the way back? Then you've got to think about the cyber security. Or even before that, you've got to think about the login details, right? So how is the person going to log into that app? How is that going to be stored? How is it going to be encrypted? Like, how does that then tie in? Then you've got the cybersecurity aspect and making sure it's all secure. Then you've got, where are you going to host it, right? Are you going to host it in AWS? Are you going to host it in Azure? Are you going to host it somewhere else? Like, you're going to create a home server, but then if you create a home server, it's only ever going to be accessible from your house. And what if your house burns down? And then how do people in other countries access it? So you've got like all these massive things, but to build that simple thing, I was going to say you need, but like, anyway, sorry, I started going off on a tangent. So you need a database developer. You need a API developer. You need a user UX person. You need a marketing person for how it's going to look. You need a business analyst to work out how it's going to be done. You need a project manager to manage it all. You need a this, you need a that. So before you know it, you've got like 15 different people. And if you imagine all of those different people, average of £30,000, what's 15 times 30?
So that would be 450.
You need £450,000 to build an app. Where are you going to get that money from? That's usually why you then seek out a venture capitalist. Because what you do is you say, I've got this brilliant idea, blah, 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 blah. This is what I want to build. And then you need that money so you can get the people to build it. And then you've got to pay for marketing. In my case, I built that. So I've actually built an app, right? I've done the database, I've done the API, I've done this, I've done that. That's why I stopped a minute ago. Because I was like, well, technically you could do it yourself. But a lot of people will just go and seek that money to get it done fast because they don't have those skills, right? They don't have the database developer. They don't know how to code in MySQL. They don't know how to do Python. They don't know how to do Swift or Java. So you need that money to be able to build that. But then you've got the problem. Once it's built, what have you got to do?
So
You've got to advertise it. You've got to make people want to use it. So how are you going to do that? You've got to employ marketing people. And then they've got to market it. And how much is that?
yes, it's interesting. Of course, not everybody has a universal skill set. A lot of these innovators who are great innovators are skilled in just designing a particular product or even a particular part of the process. So you try to either help them with everything else or lead them to realize that they need this kind of help, that they need to think about all of these aspects.
Yeah. So I like to mentor people as well as look for people that are right at that start. Also people that are already up and running. So strategically I'm looking for certain things. Then you've got the aspect of personality, right? You can find a venture you like the look of as an investor. And if you think about you're the entrepreneur, right? So you've got this fantastic business idea that you want to launch. And you meet this investor and they're willing to invest in you. And you arrange to meet them, but you're 10 minutes late, you're 20 minutes late. What are they going to think?
They might think you're not as reliable as you might look at first glance.
So you've got to think about every aspect, right? Because that investor will think, okay, so they're already turning up late. You know what I mean? So you've got to think about, as an investor, that personality, how will they interact with you? And quite often, in my experience, sometimes you might get people that have a bit of an ego. And they might get upset by something. And if you're going to work with someone, would you want to work with someone that gets upset about every slight little thing? No, you wouldn't. So all of a sudden they've lost that investment because of their personality. So you've got to be very politically correct. You've got to be very nice. Don't be horrible to them. Common sense.
Right.
Common sense, but you'd be surprised how many people don't think of these things.
Common sense is not so common.
Yes. But I would say number one thing is make sure you got your IP sorted. Make sure you've thought about the customer. Number one thing with the customer buyer, it's no point getting £450,000 off an inventor, convincing that investor that is the best thing since sliced bread. Then you launch it and nobody wants to buy it. So number one, what is the problem? How is the problem currently resolved? And then, how is what you do going to resolve that problem in a different way that is better than how it's currently resolved? Then how are you going to market it?
I think a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs will benefit from this advice, and in part this was my motivation for asking, because our virtual enlightenment salons are in essence a public good that we're offering to the world for free. So anyone who wants to develop a new product, pay attention to this, because this is how a lot of investors, how a lot of venture capitalists will think. And these are the kinds of considerations and the kinds of character traits that they will prioritize. I've had the occasion to interview people for professional positions, not to give them an investment into their business, but for instance, to hire them for a particular role, or even a volunteer role, like a US Transhumanist Party officer. We do quite a few interviews for vacant officer positions that sometimes come up. And when I interview people, I focus primarily not on what they already know in terms of their specific technical skill set. I focus to a large extent on character, and particularly character traits like reliability, openness to new information, openness
How
to
much
learning.
you like them.
Yes, and I suppose I have certain criteria that I use to determine whether and to what extent I like a person.
So if an investor likes you, right, quite often ventures fail. But if you like an entrepreneur, you will invest in them. And the thing is, if that entrepreneur is really good as well, there's a chance once their venture fails, they'll develop something else that they really like. And if you like them and you've got that connection with them, they're more likely to then offer you to invest in them when they do start up that one that's going to pick up.
Yes, and that makes sense, because it's not just this one specific venture, it's kind of an ongoing connection that could potentially be formed. Just like if you're trying to hire someone for a position, that may not be the limit of your interactions with that person. There might be another job somewhere down the road where you encounter that person, or you might think this person is a good fit.
Yeah, and I would argue as well that actually there's more people willing to invest in that out there than there actually are entrepreneurs. That's why quite often you see entrepreneur in residence, because when these really good entrepreneurs get picked up, the VCs will say to them, like, oh my God, you need to think about this idea. You need to create something here, because there are not enough good entrepreneurs.
So interesting. You think there can sometimes be too much money chasing too few promising ideas?
Yeah. I think there's a lot of money, but not enough good, not enough like good staff people to invest in. You know what I mean? Like, everybody has money. Everybody wants to chuck money at something and make a return. But who doesn't? That's why we have savings accounts, right?
Right.
And quite often what I've noticed is people will just seek ventures out just so they can tick. And you see this in the job market as well, where people ring up and they're like, oh, do you want to apply for this job? And you're like, no, it's not a job I'm interested in. And then they're like, oh, no, I still want to put you forward. Why do they want to put you forward? Because they want to get the numbers. They want to say to their boss, oh, look, I got all these candidates to put forward.
Interesting.
It's not good quality. It's just getting their numbers up.
So let's apply this to the longevity industry, because we were at the Longevity Summit Dublin for 3 days, and we heard a lot of updates about ongoing research or research directions. And of course, historically, this field has had quite limited funding, but the funding has accelerated in recent years to the point that someone in the position of Aubrey de Grey would say funding is no longer the bottleneck. The bottleneck is now talent and getting enough qualified, competent researchers on board to pursue those projects. So is this one of those situations where we now might have enough money, or at least a decent amount of money, but now we need to develop the infrastructure of the field in other respects and have enough researchers whom investors will recognize as competent and skilled in what they do and capable of achieving the kinds of results we need? Yes. Very interesting. So speaking of the Longevity Summit, how would you characterize what you observed?
I'm thinking.
I know it's a broad question.
What I observed and what.
Well, in terms of what you think are some promising directions for the field, or what you see the bottlenecks.
Yeah. So I really like the fact that we're getting to a place where we have evidence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when I say evidence, there are photos of mice showing they've redone all their hair loss.
Mm-hmm.
So basically there was this mouse, it was injected, and all of a sudden, 4 years later, so it stayed for 4 years, all its hair had regrown, it had real strong muscle mass.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I like the fact that there's also promising research showing, well, my mum liked it. My mum went really excited over it. Promising research to stop the menopause. I'm not very good with words.
Like menopause?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I like the fact that there is clear evidence of like real stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's not a case of like, oh, this is theory. It's, we've done this.
Right.
Here is an actual photo of something. Because it just allows you to realize that actually that view of transhumanism and becoming the ultimate human species and being perfect in the way you are is nearly there.
Yes. So this field has transitioned from being largely aspirational and theoretical to having, and to having some concrete results, which then inspire people and show people what is possible. And for someone who is considering making investments, that demonstration is key. Of course, a lot of work had to go into taking the field this far. Essentially, for someone in your position to see results, that means that that particular project or company or other organization needs to have crossed the so-called valley of death, which is the chasm between the early theoretical work, which receives plenty of funding, a lot of it in an academic context, and then this translational work where you're actually seeing the results in mice or in humans. Human results are even better. But this in-between phase, it could take years. For some projects, it could take decades. And somebody has to have the perseverance to take it through that valley of death.
And I feel like, you know how with Python, you've got open source packages, obviously like GitHub, everything's so on. So I feel like the longevity, if there was a website where people could go and dedicate their skills, like people that are retired, they could, in their like mechanical engineers, they could go onto that website and see a project and be like, do you know what, I'm going to help out there, and then dedicate some of their skill. I feel like it needs to become more open source and more open for people to add to, just like Python packages. You can go in, create a package, and then anyone can access that. But it's almost like people could get together, especially with COVID and the fact that people are used to talking on webcams now. It's like, why don't they get together more and like utilize that different expertise? And then when you go for a job, you're like, oh, in my spare time, for altruistic point of view, I worked on this project where we tried to analyze the DNA code to X, Y, and Z. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, get out there and do something. Get out there and use your skill with other people. Get out there and like make new friends. Like, don't stay in your circle. Expand your brain, expand your thinking, and do it in a way that can like give back to this what you guys do.
Yes, absolutely. This kind of open source collaborative framework is something we very much support within the US Transhumanist Party. And indeed, I think my vision for the Transhuman Club, which is our non-political affiliate, is to serve as a kind of hub for people to make these kinds of connections in terms of project collaborations in anything, in technology, in art, in advocacy. If, for instance, somebody goes onto our Transhuman Club forum and says, I have this skill set, I want to engage in X, Y, or Z types of projects, and somebody else could say, well, I have this kind of project, I'm looking for people with certain skill sets. That is what we need more of. And indeed, having
like the Australians do, where they say they need more hairdressers.
Interesting.
Or carpenters.
Interesting. So they've already formed these kinds of hubs for other professions, which are indeed kind of more everyday types of professions rather than cutting edge projects. But people have gotten around to recognizing the merits of this kind of distributed collaboration and casting a wider net to see what talent one can find. So it's essential, I think, these days to build that network.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. What one perceives as a talent, another person may not, but another person may.
Right, right. And you never know what that perception might be unless you look out there.
If I'm all of a sudden on a desert island and there's no computer, so I can't code, what skills have I got?
Well, I'm sure you could build a business there. If there are other people, you could build a business there. That's just the impression I get. But speaking of coding, you showed me some of your designs previously.
Oh yeah, which one?
Yes. So the computer board that you created.
Jump in there. It's my ADHD.
Yes, but you showed me some photos of like a circuit board that you put together.
Oh, this one.
Yes, yes. So show this to the viewers and explain a bit. Yes.
That's an exclusive for, and what I did is I just used my creativity to create it in a PCB board. I have also, what else have I got? They're probably getting tired of me. I think get that go off. I got me soldering.
You have quite a multifaceted skill set, I'll say this. Yes.
Do you know why? Guess why?
Because your interest in transhumanism drives these kinds of hobbies.
When you solder, you want to try and achieve that perfect, like, kiss. I'm really bad with words. It's like a chocolate bar.
Oh.
You see how it's like nice and...
Yes.
Anyway, so yeah, what was your guess?
Yes, so perhaps it's your passion for transhumanism that kind of animates these various hobbies because you see them as instantiations of the Transhumanist project.
No?
No.
You want another go? Or you want me to? I'll give you one more go.
One more go. It's an outlet for your creativity, to be sure.
Yes, true. And that's a robot dog.
Robot dog.
It follows a red ball, although that's just a picture at the moment.
Is that a robot dog?
That was from February 2021.
Oh.
When I was in England.
Oh.
Anyway, sorry, I digress. I do this all the time.
Yeah, so what motivates these pursuits of yours? Tell me. You're keeping all of us in suspense.
I live in the middle of nowhere. In the middle of nowhere, none of my friends from 20 years ago want to see me because they all have family and kids now. So I have nothing to do. And I don't like watching TV. So I spend every single evening, night, morning, learning.
Yes, that's amazing, and that's a wonderful, constructive way to respond to that situation.
So I'm a very lonely person. I don't have anyone that I talk to unless it's keeping up with film or webcam. I work from home. No boyfriend. So it's like, who do you speak to, right? It's very lonely. So I just put all my time into learning.
Well,
So this is like the first time I've got out and been amongst people.
well, it makes sense given the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, we were all, to one extent or another, trying to keep ourselves safe and using technology to the extent of our abilities to keep learning, keep in communication with the world. That's how the virtual Enlightenment Salons got started. Actually, the original Transhumanist Party Enlightenment Salons were held in my house. And recently, of course, I conducted some live streams of the recordings of those salons, and people were looking back at that era and thinking, wow, how different it was, even though this was only 4 years ago. Still, the world felt completely different. To some extent, it felt a lot freer because people could visit one another without fear of catching a dread disease. But since that time, we've had to adapt. And of course, this conference was refreshing because one could get out and meet people and have an experience like this one, which is closer in character to my original Enlightenment Salons. And it's not my own space, but we found a nice empty conference room. And we are having the kind of
broken.
We are having the kind of wide-ranging intellectual conversation that I think is ideal for forming that human connection of the finest and deepest sort.
Yeah, no human connection at the end of the day is about building bonds, right? If you don't build a bond with someone, does that mean you're a robot?
I don't think so necessarily. I think it's just a matter of what do you find to build a bond about, and can you find someone who appreciates what you do?
If you look at, like, have you ever had that feeling where you're like, oh, so-and-so is coming cool, and then they do? Back in the day when it was World War One and World War Two, there were huge accounts of family members all of a sudden getting thoughts of their loved ones that were in danger. And when they correlated the time of that danger, it was like that moment at which they died.
So
I went a bit deep there.
We've touched the subject of death, and this is a subject we can't escape discussing in the aftermath of the Longevity Summit, because for those of you who know me, I wear this pin. It says supporter of indefinite life extension, and I've worn it throughout the summit. So I
believe in reincarnation.
I do not. I believe this is the only life that we have, and this is why it's so precious. I don't understand the people who use the acronym YOLO, you only live once, to justify heedless risk-taking. Because if you only live once, and I am an atheist and materialist, I do believe this is the only life we have, then we need to hold on to this life. We need to take every possible measure. That's why I don't go on roller coasters. Yes, nor do I. I don't go skydiving.
Same. Too dangerous.
Yes. So life is precious and it's irreplaceable.
I get very anxious whenever people drive.
And that makes sense because driving is one of the riskiest activities that one engages in on a day-to-day basis. It is. So I'm a trail runner. I've participated in many trail races. Sometimes when you run a trail race, you fall and you scrape something. Some people even break bones when they fall on trails. But still,
trail is on.
Yes, there are some rugged trails out there. But driving a car is still more dangerous.
Going on no trail running.
Let's say it's not for everyone. But still, it's a safer activity than manually driving a vehicle. This is why transhumanism doesn't just focus on biological life extension. We focus on promoting a wide array of emerging technologies.
Imagine being like, Alien versus Predator. Imagine being like the Predator being, and like someone shoots you, and then you just get this machine out, and you're like, come on.
You repair your battle injuries in an instant, and you rise up to live and fight another day.
But I don't think I've ever Predator. Does that? It just makes like a noise, doesn't it? It doesn't actually like talk from memory. It's always like.
So on the subject of death and longevity, I'm curious. I'm curious what first
That's
got
my
you.
favorite film. Sorry, go on.
I'm curious what first got you interested or passionate about the prospect of life extension. Surely it wouldn't have been Predator, but what age were you at when you first realized that death or aging could be solvable problems?
Yeah, I like this one.
No? Tell me.
When I was 2 years old, roughly 2 years old, I thought this was a dream, right? So about 10 years ago, I don't know when, I said to my mum one day, I said, why did you let me run after you when you were giving birth to my younger brother? And she said, what are you talking about? I said, when you went into labor, I ran out after you and followed you and ran up the road in the ambulance because the ambulance came to take my mum away. She said, no, you didn't. She said, the ambulance came to get her and my nan picked me up and took me up to my room. I remember a clear as day when my mum was coming out of the house going into the ambulance. I followed her. I saw her. It was like I was like running after her. I saw her in the ambulance. So I thought that's weird. And then throughout my life, I'd always like pass out. Like when I got my ear pierced, I passed out because I didn't have enough sugar. And I'd always like faint. And then I'd wake up and I was floating above my body. And I'd always have these out of body experiences. My mum and my dad are the same. And I don't do it anymore because I'm like, oh, back to reality. I want to do coding and all this stuff. Sometimes like it's good to go down an avenue, but then come back. So I used to meditate. And when I used to meditate, I used to shift my consciousness. And one day I was meditating, just like on my bed, and all of a sudden, clear as day as you are here now, just like that, I'm walking down the corridor. And as I like all of a sudden the change happens, I'm like, and I look around me and there's like this archway, and I'm like, I knew every single mathematical equation on how that archway had been constructed. And I was in a silver suit, and I just was so intelligent. And I thought about me, Sophie Jones, and I thought about Earth, and in a split of a second, I knew every single thing about the history of the Earth, and I was like, wow. So all of a sudden, I'm back on the bed, and I'm like, oh, I feel like a monkey. I felt like a monkey. I experienced such like, and I remember thinking, is this what Nikola Tesla or Albert Einstein thought like? Because it was so clever. It wasn't like me. And I was like, that's weird. And then I started having weird things, like I would wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, and this number would be in my head, and I'd wake up with stomach pain, right? Like this was like a random thing, not like always woke up with stomach pain, just on this occasion, woke up with stomach pain, and this number came into my head, and I was like, what's this number in my head? So I Googled it, and it was a chemical compound for metal found in frozen veg.
Interesting.
So I started getting all these weird occurrences happen that I'm not going to go into. But it started to push me back into electronics, because when I was 9 years old, I had the internet in like 1996, and my mum got rid of it because I was on it all the time. I was starting to hack, so I didn't get it back until 2003. during that time, I also started to like electronics. But then when I went to do a project, they wouldn't sell the parts to me. They were like, that is illegal, because it was like, so after I started meditating, I started getting pushed back into technology, and I started thinking, it was like I wanted to code again. I wanted to do all these weird things. So I just went with it. That's it.
Interesting. So when you had that vision of essentially having transhuman capabilities and exceptional knowledge,
It was brilliant.
how old were you at the time?
Oh, in my 20s.
In your 20s.
Yeah.
But your interest in technology predated that, certainly, because you describe all these hobbies that you undertook as a teenager.
It gave me the utmost confidence that we, the human race, in 2,000 years, will have some type of superhuman intellect within us, of which we cannot at this time comprehend. It will make us, if you were to travel and experience that 2,000 years into the future, it would make you feel like a god. I can't even comprehend it now, having experienced it for a couple seconds. It was.
Now, here's an interesting thought to consider. If you look back 2,000 years, and this would be 22 CE, so kind of the early Roman Empire, reign of the Emperor Tiberius, and you took a Roman citizen off the streets of Rome, and you showed him what we were doing. Let's say somebody brought a laptop screen in front of this person, and he could see us talking right now in this setting. Very strange setting for an ancient Roman. First of all, the way we are dressed, yes, or demigods at the very least. So the way we are dressed would be considered sumptuous to the point of being inaccessible for
I'd be like,
most
mate,
people.
This is Christian Dior.
I mean, the wealthiest Roman elites, they would essentially drape sheets of cloth over themselves in artful ways.
Beautiful, I must admit. I quite like that look.
Yes.
Fancy dress, always dress up as Roman.
Yes, indeed, but
I get what you mean.
Yes, the forms of dress, the materials that we're using, the very fact that we're communicating from some other realm.
Yeah.
I mean, what is this?
Even like wearables, right? If we're getting to a point now where wearable technology and electronics can actually be woven into the fabric of clothes like this, so all of a sudden you got a suit, you got a full body suit, and if you fall down and bang yourself, I don't know why they don't do this for Alzheimer's, it's recorded where you hurt yourself. It's monitoring your vital statistics 24/7. That suit is monitoring your body temperature, right? We have the ability to create this technology. You could control the regulation of your heat. Obviously, like, don't have it too hot because it can cause bad heart problems. But do you know what I mean? There is the technology out there, and perhaps in 2,000 years' time, we do get to a point where we just wear suits all the time. Because if you think about it, having to wear clothes is so exhausting. The Romans that you talk about with the sheets, it was very simple, right? You just chuck a sheet on. Whereas with clothes, you're like, oh, does this go with this? Oh, then you got to go shopping. You got to go buy it. Does this? Then you spend all that time looking for the right color. Do you know what I mean? It's a lot of effort, really.
You could get your clothing custom printed and custom fitted for you with like an at-home, not quite a 3D printer, but something
I have a 3D printer.
Yes, so right now 3D printers can make plastic or metal trinkets. I have some 3D printed models of buildings. I have a 3D printed bust of Richard Wagner that I found in Sacramento. Quite interesting that the technology has come a sufficiently long way that I could find a 3D printed bust of Wagner in the storefront and buy it.
You can 3D print a 3D printer now.
Yes, indeed. And extrapolate that by 2,000 years, and we can at least have an idea that the gap between us and people of that time, who could be us, would be about as great, at least as great, as the gap between the ancient Romans and us if they could observe us today.
Yeah, do you want to see my shoes that light up?
Sure. Yes. Yes. So another
like
little augmentation. But so this vision that you had, it inspired you to kind of see the open-ended possibilities.
I think it's also pushing me into wearable technology.
Yes. Now, in terms of...
Oh, I made a wearable light up. Sorry, carry on.
Yes, in terms of overcoming mortality. So is the connection there that you want to live to see that kind of world, you want to be that kind of individual, and with our current limited lifespans, with the current human predicament that we face, we won't have enough time.
Oh, it's not really showing up.
Oh.
That's a top. And then what I did is I got my Christian Dior scarf, and I put lights on that.
Oh. Nice.
It's a star Christian Dior.
So it's interesting, you're a fashion innovator as well. Now,
I don't think fashionable people will think that of me.
well, but the thing about fashion is
My mum
that
tells me I'm not fashionable.
the thing about fashion is that to some extent it's socially constructed or socially defined.
Not socially.
And
I'm outside socially.
right, but if one does something sufficiently intriguing and one has
People
a sufficient
copy.
amount of influence, yes,
Yeah.
they could copy.
You know what? I like to wear double cuff shirts. See that double cuff? So I'm at work, right? And like there's years and years ago, and I'm there, my double cuff, and I've got this particular color that came out new. Anyway, this girl rocks up a week later in the same shirt as me, and I go, "Oh, I like that shirt. It's a good color, isn't it?" She's like, "Oh, I've had it a year." I'm like, "Mate, you blatantly haven't had that a year because it's only just come out last week."
Well, it's like the people who say, "I wore that before it was cool."
Imitation is the best form of flattery.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So anybody who sets a future trend has to, at some point, be willing to risk being unfashionable by the standards of their current time.
Happens to me all the time.
So you, up until your 20s, up until you had that experience, what did you think of the prospect of perhaps extending human life? Did you think it was possible? Did you think it was realistic in your lifetime?
And then I hate it.
Okay, tell me.
I thought I know my soul lives forever. I believe in reincarnation.
Do you still believe in reincarnation? It's interesting because there are a lot of different persuasions on this subject among the transhumanist community, and we've had some virtual Enlightenment salons on religion as well. We brought people of different religious perspectives. Like, did you know there's both a Christian Transhumanist Association and a Mormon Transhumanist Association in the United States? And the Mormons are among some of the most intellectually active and thoughtful transhumanists, in my view. There's actually a lot in Mormon theology that aligns with transhumanism, because in Mormon theology, it is virtuous to try to become like God, to try to emulate God. And if God is this being of great power and wisdom and virtue, then the Mormon transhumanists try to be like that.
Imagine if we were all just fallen angels, like follow Lucifer.
Interesting. That could be a theological interpretation. And I think there will be many different theological interpretations as the transhuman era unfolds, because people need to find narratives that essentially form coherent worldviews that explain this transition that we're living through.
Man can make heaven out of a hell, or hell out of heaven.
Yeah, so which one will we choose as the human species? Let me know your thoughts on this. So do you see human civilization heading in a desirable direction, or do you see a risk of the turmoil and the chaos overtaking us? No.
What?
Why?
Cooperation.
Cooperation. So you think cooperation will pull us out of this predicament?
They have proven in game theory, tit for tat always wins.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a collection of games that just go after it for themselves, and it's only that, and obviously it's all going to be evil, but if you start to put a cooperative algorithm in amongst it, it always takes over. Good always triumphs.
Good always triumphs. I hope you're right. I admire your optimism. I think we often need to fight, or at least work hard, in order for good to triumph. But many of us are trying in our own particular ways. I certainly try with the Transhumanist Party, and many of our devoted officers and members, certainly many among the audience today, are trying in their own particular ways. Many of the researchers whom we heard present at the Longevity Summit are trying. Aubrey de Grey is trying to his utmost. The man has just such remarkable stamina and energy and patience that he is definitely one of the heroes who is moving our civilization forward. And I just hope it's enough. You mentioned, of course, the very powerful incentives toward cooperation, and intellectually, those are indeed going to be the better strategies to adopt. Do you think some people might face like cognitive limitations that prevent them from seeing that? Do you think, despite those cognitive limitations, they might be somehow inexorably channeled toward cooperation nonetheless? Of course, Adam Smith wrote about the invisible hand, which helps coordinate human activity, even if individual actors within an economy are not aware of it. So do you think people who don't have the proper mindset could still be collaborative in the way you described?
People that have autism are collaborative.
Even though they don't think of the world in those kinds of relational terms sometimes. And I would say, by the way, most people with autism are completely benign, really nice people. It's just their minds are focused on a different subset of reality, whereas
I've actually got a lot of friends that are autistic.
right.
And they're some of the best friends I ever had.
Right.
Straight.
they don't have the same, let's say, complex of both societal niceties and mutual deceptions that often take place.
That's like me. I don't laugh. Like, I just laugh at myself. I don't take myself seriously. You know what I mean? I'm just like,
You have a great sense of humor.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You got to laugh. You know what I mean? I was like cry. It's kind of like your favorite, YOLO.
But it's interesting that you observe this, because sometimes in places of the world that have experienced great hardship, like say the Soviet Union, people develop very interesting senses of humor, kind of a sardonic sense of humor, to be sure. Yes. So a very low-grade version of that kind of humor is a joke that actually Ronald Reagan often repeated. So essentially, an American man and a Soviet man are talking to one another, and the American man tries to explain, well, look, in the United States, we're a free society because anybody here can say the president of the United States is an idiot. And the Soviet man says, well, this is not so much different in the Soviet Union, because any man in the Soviet Union can also say the president of the United States is an idiot.
So if you think about it, you're in a stressful environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're working with someone that can't have a laugh. Like us now, video.
Mm-hmm.
If you're with someone and they're uptight, you can't have that rapport in an
Right.
interview. How the hell are you going to have that rapport? So you're in a business context and you're against timelines and it's a highly stressful environment. Who are you going to work with? The person that's like, or you're going to work with the person that's like, oh God, and then put that and makes like a little joke like, oh. Do you know what I mean? It just like, it allows you to just.
Yes. So when you are looking for the prospective founders to invest in, do you consider that aspect of their personality as well?
Yeah. Because
Interesting.
the thing is, a lot of people that are uptight and take life very seriously, when it doesn't go their way or it gets too much for them, they won't go. But people that don't take life seriously and aim very flawlessly, always assume formlessly, they're more like the wave, right? They just keep going. Whereas people that like, it's like.
So you're looking for a certain degree of resiliency, and you think
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And I think with laughter, you get that more. Do you know what I mean? It's more like, and it allows you to have a bond as well, you know.
Indeed, indeed. So you made a comment to me that I wanted to hear you expand upon. When you gave that lecture, that very powerful oration on transhumanism 7 years ago, you talked about some possibilities of whether or not AI will become sentient. But it seems your views have been revised a bit since that time, and you said you do not think that AI will be able to attain consciousness. Can you elaborate on why you don't think so?
Okay. You think about coding something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you got different functions that do different things. You've got this, you've got that. Ultimately, it's zeros and ones, and those functions achieve certain things. So at the moment, again, I'm crossing my legs. Getting ready. They talk about general intelligence, right? And it's like artificial intelligence at the moment. They say, oh, we got a robot and it's so intelligent because it shows you how to get to your room. Oh my God, it shows me how to get to my room. Ooh. You go there and there's this robot. You have to like touch it, select who you are, blah, 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 blah. Then it goes down a corridor, might do a left, might do a right, but it goes down off of a map. And then it gets to the lift. So you're on the ground floor. So then when it gets to the lift, you have to then type in the robot which lift door is open, the one on the left or the one on the right. And then you've got to put your arm there to stop the doors from closing so it don't hit the robot and wait for the robot to roll in. And you get in the lift. Then you've got to press what floor you go to. Then you've got to tell the robot to get up. You've got to hold the door for the robot. Then if the robot all of a sudden encounters something that is a bit of a problem, it will stay still for 5 minutes until some trigger goes off to alert a human being to come and get that robot because it's got stuck.
So there are clearly limitations to current AI systems and robots.
Yeah, and then you think about it, right? In like sometimes, so I'll be driving down the motorway, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, just like that. So that right there is a random function, right? You want to trigger a time function of all of a sudden, bang. So all of a sudden, in my mind, I'll get a creative thought. So how do you trigger that? Like I said, you could just have a time function that you all of a sudden randomly, you give a robot a function that suddenly triggers. But then inside of that function, what are you going to code? Because all of a sudden, I might have a flashback of my 18th birthday when I'm opening up some birthday present. So what is that thought? So that's a memory. So what you want to do then is you randomly write a function that randomly triggers a remembrance of a memory. Okay, so then what is it returning? Is it returning a joyous feeling? Is it returning a horror feeling? Like, so then you got to randomly code the random feeling. And then it's like, what's the purpose of that? And then, you see what I mean? You get into this kind of like randomized, but what the robot can't do is from that randomization, it can't then link that to creating a song, or can it?
Well, right now, of course, there have been impressive advances in AI image generation, say with DALL-E 2 and Midjourney, and they can create digital paintings that look quite impressive. For some of these paintings, you could say they're indistinguishable from what a human artist could have done.
Why did the creator of that destroy the program?
I don't believe they were destroyed. I mean, those AIs still exist. People are still using
There's
them.
an AI out there. I think it was either what you're talking about or it was a music production.
Ah, David Cope. You're talking about David
Yeah,
Cope, the
yeah.
professor who created algorithmic music. And he had several programs. The one he destroyed, well, he didn't destroy the program. He destroyed the database for the program. It was called EMI, Experiments in Musical Intelligence, ME for short. And then there was another program called Emily Howell that he created afterward that is still in existence. I watched an interview with him, and by the way, Emmy was able to compose music in the style of Johann Sebastian Bach, Friedrich Chopin, Beethoven, Mozart, Vivaldi, and I downloaded many of those recordings, and many audiences thought that a lot of these compositions were of the same level of quality as the originals, but he kept being asked to do certain projects like complete Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, which had been done actually since that time by another AI, one of the Huawei phone AIs in 2019, I believe. And he just, I think, was tired of receiving these requests to do all these tasks with his AI.
So there you go. So when the robot creates this, does it experience that joyous feeling that we experience?
I don't think those AIs can experience anything. So in terms of inner experience, I'm pretty confident that no AI that has been created thus far has inner experience or sentience.
And that's why I don't think we can ever program.
So, of course, there is a difference between intelligence and consciousness, and you have definitely articulated that distinction. So you could have a process that creates something that we think is sophisticated, that is equal to our capabilities, but there's no inner sensation of the world on the part of that process. It's essentially a lot of lines of code that generate these images or generate this music. And I would assert, of course, these are all narrow AIs. They are designed to...
I think you're an AI, the way you recite knowledge.
Trust me, I have quite a bit of inner experience.
An AI is interviewing me.
Would an AI be able to host a virtual Enlightenment Salon?
Would an AI be able to experience laughter like that?
I think I've just disproved your assertion then. Unless I'm a very plausible android indeed.
Or unless you're just doing a function where you're trained to laugh at certain random.
So it's interesting that you associate randomness with a more plausible impression of being conscious. But could it be more than randomness? Could it be like an emergent property that arises with a certain level of complexity, like life itself? So we are comprised of atoms, mostly carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. If you take one carbon atom, it's not conscious, it's not alive. But
when you put those three together, it makes the sign of the beast.
We get back to the people who think that the microchip implants are the sign of disease.
But on that, right,
Mhm.
you look at the beauty of the world, you look at the way atoms, like I just said, the sign of the beast. You look at the way bacteria are so tiny, and then how everything evolves. You've got the beautiful bumblebee that enhances our ecosystem, keeps us alive, with its huge body, but these tiny little wings that manage to carry it. And then you've got the beauty of nature, the beauty of a man and a woman, and the structure of that, the way they look, the way that we as human beings have evolved to create architecture in these massive skyscrapers, and it's just, I like cities, I find them beautiful. And then as you zoom out, you've got the beautiful nature of a dried up river with all its different pathways of how the differences in water is flowed. And then you zoom out again, you get this beautiful atmospheric view of the planet. And then you zoom out and you see just how innocent the Earth just looks from the state of the solar system and how big the sun is in comparison. So then you're zooming out of the solar system and you've got the beauty of the Milky Way and just how tiny the solar system is in regards to the Milky Way. And then you've got Andromeda about to collide with the Milky Way. And then you've got our Super Virgo cluster galaxy. And then you've got the universe. Like, how did that get created? Where did that start from? What sparked it off? And then what sparked that off? It's just like a continuous infinite loop of which it makes the mind go.
You know this.
And that's why I don't take drugs. Can you imagine it if I did?
I think
no, we should probably finish.
I completely agree with you. By the way, the beauty of life, the beauty of our experience of this world is plenty. I completely refuse to take mind-altering drugs myself, but you made this just such a vivid, poetic description of the human experience, and you were able to encompass it from the smallest to the largest scale in just this one narrative that I could see how much you love life, how much you appreciate the world in which we live and the experience of that world. So I think you actually answered my question about why you desire longevity. It's this kind of experience. It's this kind of awareness of the wonders of existence and this curiosity that drives us as human beings, and that we never want to extinguish, because inside your mind, which is quite a beautiful mind, you have encompassed this totality of existence. And if you look out at the rest of humanity, there are now over 8 billion such minds in the world, and we don't want to lose any one of them because life is so precious. So, Sophie, I really appreciate you joining us today and having this discussion of immense breadth with us, sharing your thoughts. You are a true transhumanist, and I'm honored to have met you.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for watching.
Indeed, and to all of our viewers, live long and prosper.